Grace was in the middle of the kitchen when she heard the sound of the key in the door. Oliver shouldn't be home this early. She felt a chill run down her spine. The brown envelope she held in her hands trembled slightly. She knew what was inside it, but she didn't want to believe. The door opened, and Oliver walked in, his eyes meeting hers. He noticed the envelope, his face going pale. For a moment, the silence between them was so thick that it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Grace, what do you have in your hands?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer immediately, but her expression said it all. He stepped forward, trying to take the envelope, but she stepped back, holding it against her chest as if it were a shield. "Please, don't do this," he pleaded, his voice breaking. Grace felt a tear roll down her face, but she kept her grip firm. "I trusted you, Oliver. I believed that we were different." Oliver tried to reach for her hand, but she recoiled once more. The world felt like it was crumbling around them, and the truth that was about to be revealed could change everything forever. In the silences of Cedar Hill, a story of betrayals, secrets, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Grace felt the weight of the world on her shoulders for as long as she could remember. Born in Willow Creek, Alabama, a small and conservative town, she was received not with love, but with disappointment. Hank, her father, always wanted a son, someone who could carry on the family name and legacy. When Grace was born, that wish went unfulfilled. The arrival of Luke, a year later, finally brought the long-awaited joy to her parents, and Grace was relegated to the background. Caroline, her mother, never hid her preference for Luke. While he received everything good and new clothes, expensive toys, and the attention of all the relatives, Grace learned to be content with what was left over. Luke's birthday parties were grand events, with the entire family gathered, while Grace barely had the right to a simple cake, blowing out the candles alone. Little by little, Grace began to realize that there was no space for her in that family. She felt invisible, suffocated by expectations she could never meet. Hank saw no sense in spending money on a girl's education. When Grace asked to continue her studies beyond elementary school, her father's response was harsh. "Why? You've already had more than you deserve. A girl doesn't need more than that to find a decent husband." Those words hurt her deeply, but also ignited a flame of determination within her. Grace decided that if she couldn't count on her parents, she would rely on herself. At 16, she began working in a textile factory in the town. The work was hard, the hours long, but Grace was determined. She saved every penny she earned while spending her nights studying secretly in her room. Her books were old and worn, but they were her most precious treasure. Every page she read was a small act of rebellion against the expectations her family had for her. It was 3 years of constant struggle. Grace balanced her factory job with her nighttime studies, and although there were moments when she almost gave up, something inside her pushed her to keep going. At 19, Grace finally passed the exam that equated to a high school diploma. She did it all on her own, with no support, no one to celebrate with her. That victory was a milestone, a declaration of independence that would change her life forever. That night, after receiving the results, Grace made the most important decision of her life, to leave Willow Creek and her family behind. With the little money she had saved, she packed her things into a small suitcase, took one last look at the room that had been her prison for so many years, and left home without looking back. The darkness of the night enveloped her as she walked through the quiet streets. But Grace felt something different inside her, a mix of fear and euphoria. For the first time, she was free. Grace arrived in Birmingham with her heart full of hope and uncertainty. The city, with its tall buildings and busy streets, was a completely different world from Willow Creek. Grace didn't know anyone and had no plans beyond finding a job and starting a new life. Fate led her to a small family restaurant called the Blue Magnolia. There, after a brief period of adjustment, she found work as a waitress. The job at the restaurant was tough, but Grace was used to challenges. She dedicated herself completely, serving customers with a smile even when she felt exhausted inside. She had a quiet strength that kept her going, a determination that no one could take away from her. It was at the Blue Magnolia that Grace met Tyler, the owner's son. Tyler was different from all the men Grace had ever known. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to see something in Grace that no one else did. He made a point of complimenting her on her work, praised her smile, and slowly, these compliments began to touch Grace's heart. She, who had never experienced true love, began to open up to the possibility of being happy with someone. After a few months of getting to know each other, Tyler invited Grace out, and soon their relationship blossomed into love. It was a fast, impulsive love, but for Grace, it felt like the right thing. Tyler made her feel special, treated her as if she were the only woman in the world. Less than a year later, they decided to get married. The wedding was done in secret, without the presence of friends or family. For Grace, that secret was a way to protect the love she felt, away from the critical eyes of the world. However, the secret didn't last long. When Beverly, Tyler's mother, discovered the marriage, reality hit Grace with devastating force. Beverly, a proud and controlling woman, was furious to find out that her son had married someone like Grace, a simple waitress from a small town. Beverly's rage knew no bounds. She confronted Grace at the restaurant, publicly humiliating her, and then demanded that Tyler annul the marriage. Grace, who had already suffered so much at the hands of her own family, felt like her world was crumbling once again. She tried to argue, attempted to explain that the love between her and Tyler was real, but Beverly's words were like knives, cutting deep. The matriarch was not willing to yield, and her anger was fueled by prejudice and an unshakable belief that her son deserved something better. Beverly's harsh words echoed in Grace's mind as she tried in vain to hold back her tears. "You will never be good enough for my son," Beverly had said. Those words haunted her every night as she lay next to Tyler in the small apartment they shared. Even with all of Tyler's promises that everything would be fine, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. And indeed, the house began to crumble. The pressures of life, the constant disdain from Beverly, and financial difficulties started to wear down the relationship that once seemed unbreakable. Tyler, who had initially been a safe harbor for Grace, began to pull away. He spent more time away from home, claiming to be busy with work, but Grace knew something was wrong. She could feel the love that once bound them fading, replaced by something cold and distant. Grace fought to keep the marriage alive, to protect the small family she was trying to build. But what she didn't know was that, just like her childhood, this new phase of her life would be marked by even greater challenges that would test her strength and her ability to withstand the adversities that life continued to impose upon her. The days in Birmingham became increasingly difficult for Grace. The tension between her and Tyler was palpable. He started spending more time away from home, and when he was present, his demeanor was cold, almost hostile. Grace knew something was wrong, but whenever she tried to talk to Tyler, he always had a ready excuse, diverting the conversation or, worse, exploding in frustration. Beverly's harsh words continued to echo in Grace's mind, creating a barrier of fear and insecurity. One day, while organizing the small apartment they called home, Grace found a receipt from a luxury hotel in the city center, hidden among Tyler's papers. Her heart raced. She knew that wasn't a good sign. Trying to stay calm, she waited for him to return from work to confront him, but when Tyler arrived, tired and irritable, she hesitated. Something in his expression made her pull back, and instead of questioning him, Grace silently tucked the receipt away, suffocating the growing suspicion that threatened to engulf her completely. But silence couldn't last forever. Tyler's absences became more frequent, and his excuses increasingly unconvincing. Until, on a cold November morning, everything came to light. Grace woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest, as if she knew that day would bring an irreversible change. Tyler left early, as usual, claiming to have an important meeting. However, Grace couldn't shake the unease consuming her. Something inside her urged her to act. She took a taxi and went to the hotel address on the receipt. She felt like she was betraying her own trust, but the need to know the truth was stronger. When she arrived, her heart raced. The luxurious hotel, with its imposing marble columns and sparkling chandeliers, seemed to belong to a world very distant from hers. Grace approached the reception desk, her palms sweating. "Good morning. I would like to know if Mr. Tyler Harper is staying here," she asked, her voice trembling as she tried to appear confident. The receptionist, a friendly young woman, typed something into the computer before looking up. "Yes, he is registered in room 302, the receptionist replied, unaware of the impact her words had on Grace. She quickly thanked her and left the hotel, feeling the world crumble around her. Grace returned home in shock, trying to process what she had just discovered. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and the pain was almost unbearable. When Tyler returned that night, Grace was waiting for him in the living room, the hotel receipt in her hands. She wanted answers, and this time, she wouldn't accept evasive excuses. "Tyler, what is this?" she asked, holding the receipt with trembling hands. "Why were you at a hotel?" Tyler looked at the paper and for a brief moment seemed speechless, but he quickly regained his composure and replied coldly, "Grace, it's not what you're thinking. I was there for work." "Work?" Grace repeated, incredulous. "What kind of work requires you to stay at a hotel in the city center when we have a house here?" He sighed, visibly irritated. "I don't have time for your paranoia, Grace. You need to trust me." "Trust you? How can I trust you when you don't tell me the truth?" Grace felt tears beginning to fill her eyes, but she didn't want to cry. Not in front of him. Tyler, however, was unfazed. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. "I'm not going to discuss this now. I have more important things to do." And without looking back, he left the apartment, leaving Grace alone with her doubts and fears. From that day on, the distance between them only grew. Grace spent sleepless nights tossing and turning in bed as she tried to understand how the man she loved could be drifting so far away. And then, the truth finally came to light in a way Grace never could have imagined. A week later, Tyler came home later than usual, visibly nervous. He barely looked at Grace when he entered, throwing his keys on the table and sitting on the sofa with a heavy sigh. Grace, who was in the kitchen preparing dinner, felt her stomach churn at the sight of his expression. "Tyler," she began, trying to keep her voice steady, "we need to talk." He didn't respond immediately. He sat in silence, staring at the floor as if searching for the right words. Finally, he looked up at Grace, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart freeze. "Grace, I don't know how to tell you this," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But I think you've already noticed that things aren't well between us." Grace froze. She knew she was about to hear something that would change her life forever, but she wasn't prepared for what came next. "I met someone else," he said in one breath, as if ripping off a Band-Aid from an open wound. "We've been together for a few months, and she's pregnant." Grace's world crumbled in that instant. Every word Tyler spoke felt like a knife piercing her chest. She felt her legs weaken and had to hold on to the kitchen counter to avoid falling. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "And you want a divorce?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible, already knowing the answer. Tyler nodded slowly. "Yes, I think it's best for all of us." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. All the struggles, all the sacrifices she had made to keep that marriage together, all seemed in vain. She looked at Tyler, the man who once promised to love and protect her, and saw a stranger. Without another word, Grace left the room, slowly climbed the stairs, and entered the bedroom. She closed the door behind her, as if trying to isolate herself from that cruel reality. She didn't cry. There were no more tears, only an overwhelming emptiness. Grace knew that this was the last night she would spend in that house that had once been her refuge. There was nothing left for her there. The next morning, as the sun rose over Birmingham, Grace had already made her decision. She would not leave that house without fighting for her rights. Tyler might have decided to move on, but Grace wasn't going to simply disappear. She had helped build that life, and she wouldn't let him take it from her without compensating her. She descended the stairs, feeling stronger than ever. When Tyler woke up, he found Grace sitting at the kitchen table, with a look of determination he had never seen before. "Tyler, I will accept the divorce," she said calmly, "but only after we settle what you owe me. I want half the value of the house and child support for our daughter." Tyler, taken by surprise by Grace's firmness, tried to argue. "Grace, that's unnecessary. We can solve this another way." "No, Tyler. It's already decided. If you don't agree, I'll seek a lawyer and take this to court," she replied without hesitation. Tyler realized he had no choice. He knew Grace was serious, and if he wanted to move on with his new life, he would have to give in. That same night, he transferred the money to Grace's account, officially closing the most painful chapter of their lives. Grace left that house with her head held high, feeling that, despite everything, she had won a battle. She knew she still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt in control of her own destiny. She moved to Cedar Hill, Tennessee, seeking a fresh start, far from the painful memories of Birmingham. There, in a place where no one knew her, Grace was ready to rebuild her life in a way she had never been able to do before. The struggle was not over, but Grace was determined to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for her daughter, Valentina, who was now the reason for her existence. The first days in Cedar Hill were tough for Grace. The small town in Tennessee was quiet and welcoming, but for her, everything felt strange and unfamiliar. Grace had moved with her daughter, Valentina, and she was determined to start anew. The money she gained from the divorce was enough to ensure a start, but not for long. Grace knew she needed to find a job quickly, something that would allow her to support herself and her daughter. With the help of a small local employment agency, Grace found work as a housekeeper. It was hard work, but Grace was used to challenges. Her new boss, Oliver Thompson, was a reserved and solitary man who lived in a large house at the end of a quiet street. Since the death of his mother, Oliver had kept to himself, focusing on work and avoiding any type of social interaction. The first time Grace arrived at Oliver's house, she was impressed by the organization and cleanliness of the place. It seemed like no one lived there. The surfaces were impeccably clean, the curtains perfectly aligned, and every object appeared to be exactly where it should be. It was as if the house was on pause, waiting for something or someone who would never arrive. Grace began working in silence, unsure of where to start. There was no dust to clean, no furniture to rearrange. She felt a pang of anxiety, fearing that Oliver wouldn't see value in her work. She then decided to wash the curtains, disinfect the lamps, and reorganize the refrigerator, even knowing there wasn't much to change. Grace worked quickly, non-stop, keeping busy with the small tasks she found, and when she finished, she still had time left. It was then that she headed to the kitchen. She decided that if there wasn't much to clean, she could cook something special for Oliver. She bought fresh ingredients at the local market and began preparing a homemade meal. As she chopped the vegetables and mixed the spices, Grace felt a slight pleasure in realizing that, despite everything, she still had a love for the act of cooking. The kitchen became a refuge, a place where she could forget her worries and focus on the simple joy of preparing something with care. Time passed without her noticing, and when she finished, The house was filled with the comforting aroma of home-cooked food. Before leaving, Grace left a note for Oliver, explaining that if he wanted something specific for meals, he just had to leave a note in the refrigerator and she would gladly prepare it. Grace left the house feeling a bit more confident, despite the uncertainties still surrounding her. The following week, when Grace returned to Oliver's house, she found a small surprise. There was a note on the refrigerator, written in clean, precise handwriting. "Thank you for the food. It was delicious." That simple message warmed Grace's heart in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't common to receive thanks at work, and that made all the difference. The following weeks brought a new routine. Grace continued to do her work meticulously, and Oliver's notes began to appear more frequently. "The soup was excellent. Could you reduce the portions a bit? The chicken was perfect." The exchange of messages became a silent form of communication between the two, and Grace began to realize that she took a certain pleasure in waiting for Oliver's responses. One day, Grace arrived at Oliver's house and noticed that he was there. It was rare to find him, as he usually left before she arrived. He looked dejected, with a pale face and tired eyes. "Are you okay, Mr. Thompson?" Grace asked, feeling a bit uncomfortable seeing him that way. "I'm fine, Grace. Just a bit under the weather," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But you can go home. I don't want you to catch anything." Grace, however, couldn't leave Oliver alone in that condition. Without hesitation, she went to the nearest pharmacy, bought some medicine, and returned to his house. She prepared a hot soup and set everything up before leaving. Before she departed, she left a new note instructing him to take the medicine and eat well to recover. The next day, when she returned to work, Grace found a basket of gifts in the kitchen, filled with a variety of beauty products and a note. "Thank you for taking care of me. This is for you." Grace was surprised and a bit uncomfortable with the gesture. She wasn't used to being cared for or pampered in any way, and it made her hesitate. When Oliver returned from work that day, she waited for him to explain that while she appreciated the gift, she didn't feel comfortable accepting it. "Mr. Thompson, I really appreciate the gift, but I don't think I can accept it," she said, holding the basket in her hands. Oliver smiled slightly, something Grace hadn't seen before. "Grace, you took care of me when I was sick. This is just a small way to repay your kindness. Please accept it." Grace couldn't say no. "All right, I'll accept. And I'm glad you liked the soup," she said, smiling shyly. As the days passed, the relationship between Grace and Oliver began to change. What was once merely a professional interaction became something more personal, more intimate. They started talking more when they ran into each other, sharing little details about their lives. Oliver, who had always been reserved, began to open up, telling Grace about his childhood and the death of his mother, which had left him profoundly lonely. Grace also shared parts of her story. She talked about her failed marriage, the pain of being betrayed, and the struggle of raising her daughter alone. Oliver listened attentively, offering words of comfort and understanding that Grace hadn't heard in a long time. One day, after one of those conversations, Oliver made an unexpected proposal. "Grace, have you ever thought about going out for dinner? I mean, you and I as friends?" Grace was surprised, but also touched by Oliver's sincerity. "I think so. It's been so long since I went out to dinner with someone," she said, a bit nervous but smiling. That night they went to a small restaurant in Cedar Hill. It was a simple place but cozy, and the food was delicious. The conversation between them flowed naturally, and Grace found herself laughing at jokes Oliver made, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. When they mentioned the date on Oliver's calendar that she had noticed weeks earlier, he explained that it was the anniversary of his mother's passing, not a romantic commitment, as Grace had assumed. That night, Grace realized that Oliver was different from any man she had ever known. He was kind, considerate, and understanding, qualities she had forgotten existed in someone. When the night came to an end and Oliver walked her home, Grace felt a mix of emotions she couldn't explain. She was starting to feel something more than simple friendship, and that both scared and excited her. The following days brought a new dynamic to their relationship. Oliver began leaving small gifts for Grace, nothing extravagant, but always something that showed he was thinking of her. Grace, in turn, prepared meals with even more care, trying to make each dish special. But despite all this new happiness, Grace still had her fears. She was afraid of getting hurt again, afraid to trust someone and be betrayed as she had been in the past. These doubts haunted her, even when she was with Oliver, and she knew she would need to confront them if she truly wanted to move forward. It was Valentina, Grace's daughter, who finally encouraged her to take a step toward happiness. "Mom, everyone deserves to be happy. You too. And I think Mr. Thompson really likes you. Why don't you give him a chance?" Influenced by her daughter's words, Grace began to reconsider. She knew she was at a crossroads, and that this decision could define the course of her life from then on. After a long reflection, Grace finally allowed herself to dream of a future with Oliver. "I accept," she said over the phone, her voice trembling but firm. "I accept trying to build something new with you." Oliver was moved. "You have no idea how happy this makes me, Grace. I promise I'll do everything to make sure you never regret this decision." Grace was in love like never before. She felt reborn, rediscovering feelings she thought she had lost forever. Her marriage to Oliver was becoming a reality, and she found herself choosing a wedding dress, something she never imagined she would do again. Every moment spent with him was a confirmation that finally, things were falling into place in her life. But fate still had a surprise in store for Grace, one that she could not foresee, and that would bring to light all the wounds she was trying to leave behind. While in the elegant ballroom of a hotel, choosing the venue for the wedding reception, Grace received an unexpected visit that would shake her newfound happiness. Turning a corner, she came face to face with Tyler, the man who had hurt her so deeply. "Grace, what are you doing here?" he asked, with a tone of incredulity and disdain. "Since when do you frequent places like this?" Grace felt her heart race but kept her composure. "It's none of your business, Tyler. I'm here taking care of my life. Something you should do as well." Tyler didn't give up. "So this is it? You're trying to replace me with a rich older man? I always knew you were nothing but an opportunist." Anger surged within Grace, but she stood her ground. "My happiness doesn't depend on you, Tyler. And yes, I'm moving on. Something you should have done a long time ago." Before the situation could escalate, Oliver appeared, and upon seeing Grace's expression, he immediately knew what was happening. "Grace, is everything okay?" he asked, wrapping her in a protective embrace. Tyler, seeing Oliver, tried to maintain his composure, but the contempt in his voice was evident. "So this is your new Prince Charming? Congratulations, Grace. I hope you're happy with your choice." Oliver looked directly at Tyler, with a firmness Grace had never seen before. "I'm not interested in your provocations, Tyler. Grace is now a part of my life, and I'm not going to let you hurt her again." Tyler tried to retort, but Oliver continued, not giving him a chance. "We're here for a completely different reason. We're planning our wedding, and you're not welcome. If you insist on continuing with this attitude, you'll have to deal with me." The tension in the air was palpable, but Tyler, realizing he was at a disadvantage, decided to back down. "This isn't over," he said, before leaving hurriedly, his face red with anger. Grace, still a bit shaken, looked at Oliver with gratitude. "Thank you for protecting me." "I will always be here for you, Grace. I will never let anyone hurt you again," he replied, holding her hand firmly. Despite the unexpected encounter with Tyler, Grace managed to focus on what truly mattered, her future with Oliver. But she knew this wouldn't be the last challenge she would face. She was ready, however, to fight for her happiness and that of her daughter, knowing that together they could overcome any adversity. Finally, the wedding day arrived, and Grace felt a happiness she had never experienced before. Valentina was by her side, smiling from ear to ear, as Grace walked down the aisle towards Oliver. They exchanged simple but meaningful vows, promising to care for each other for the rest of their lives. But while Grace believed the worst was behind her, she was about to discover that fate still had more tests in store for her strength and resilience. However, this time she knew she had someone who truly loved her by her side, ready to face whatever the future would bring. One day, Grace received a letter from the judiciary informing her that Tyler had filed a lawsuit to gain custody of Valentina. "Grace, what do you have in your hands?" Oliver asked, his voice barely audible. After learning what it was about, he said that this fight was also his. The months that followed the court's decision were a time of renewal for Grace. She could finally breathe easy, knowing that Valentina was safe and that Tyler had lost the opportunity to cause her any more harm. The home she shared with Oliver became a place of peace and love, where Grace, Valentina, and Oliver grew even closer, forming a true family. Grace began to allow herself to dream about the future. She and Oliver discussed plans for what would come next, including the possibility of expanding their home or perhaps even adopting a child in the future. The idea of giving Valentina a brother or sister filled her with hope and joy, something she never imagined possible after everything she had been through. One day, while preparing dinner, Grace received an unexpected call. It was from Tyler's lawyer, informing her that he had left the city. He would no longer contest the court's decision and would make no further attempts to see Valentina. Grace felt a mix of relief and sadness. Although she knew it was best for her daughter, part of her still mourned the way things had ended with Tyler. However, it was now clear that he had made his choice, and she needed to move on. Oliver noticed Grace's expression when she hung up the phone. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping closer. Grace nodded. "Yeah, it's just Tyler left town. He won't try to see Valentina anymore." Oliver pulled her into an embrace, feeling the weight of that news. "He made his decision, Grace. Now you can focus on us, on our family." "I know," she replied, resting her head against Oliver's chest. "I just hope he finds peace one day." Days turned into weeks, and life in Grace and Oliver's home returned to a normal rhythm. Valentina was thriving at school, and her relationship with Oliver deepened every day. Grace felt stronger and more secure than ever, determined not to let the past interfere with her future. However, life always has a way of surprising us, even when we think we're prepared for anything. On a sunny morning, while Grace was organizing the kitchen, she felt a slight dizziness. She thought it was just fatigue, but when the sensation persisted, she decided to schedule a doctor's appointment. A few days later, Grace found herself sitting in the doctor's office, waiting for the results of her tests. The doctor walked in with a serious yet reassuring expression. "Grace, the results show that you have a case of anemia, but that's treatable. However, we also detected something that may come as a surprise to you," he said, a slight smile on his lips. Grace furrowed her brow, confused. "What do you mean by that, doctor?" "Grace, you're pregnant," he replied, looking at her with a gentle expression. For a moment, Grace's world stopped. Pregnant? She had never considered that possibility. After all the challenges and at her age, she thought the chance of having another child had passed. "Is everything okay?" the doctor asked, noticing Grace's shock. Grace slowly nodded, still processing the information. "Yes, I just didn't expect this." When she returned home, Grace felt a mix of emotions. How would she tell Oliver? How would he react? Although she was happy, fear also accompanied her, the fear that something could go wrong. When Oliver got home that night, Grace led him to the garden. It was the place where they loved to talk, away from the worries of the world. She needed the calm atmosphere to tell him. "Oliver, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice trembling. Oliver noticed the seriousness in her voice and looked at her with concern. "What happened, Grace? Is everything okay?" Grace took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I went to the doctor today and he gave me some unexpected news." Oliver furrowed his brow, worried. "Are you sick?" She shook her head, smiling slightly. "No, nothing like that. Actually, I'm pregnant, Oliver." The shock was evident on Oliver's face. He fell silent for a few seconds, processing the information. But soon, a smile began to form on his lips, a smile of pure joy. "Pregnant? Grace, this is amazing." He pulled her into a tight embrace, emotion overflowing. The relief and happiness of Oliver dispelled Grace's worries. She nestled into his arms, feeling that despite all the uncertainties, this was the life she had always dreamed of. And now, with a new baby on the way, her family was about to grow in a way she had never imagined. The following months were a whirlwind of preparations. Valentina was thrilled to learn she would have a brother or sister, and she actively participated in choosing the name and decorating the baby's room. Grace and Oliver's home was filled with love, laughter, and anticipation as they awaited the arrival of the new family member. Finally, the day arrived. Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom they named Lila. The emotion in the hospital was palpable. Oliver was by Grace's side the whole time, holding her hand and looking at Lila with tears in his eyes. "She's perfect," Oliver whispered, kissing Grace's forehead. "Yes, she is," Grace replied, feeling complete in a way she never thought possible. "And all of this was only possible because you never gave up on me, Oliver." Oliver smiled, his eyes full of love. "We never gave up on each other, Grace, and that's what brought us here." The return home was filled with joy and small celebrations. Valentina was excited to be the big sister and got involved in every detail of caring for Lila. The house was finally complete, filled with laughter and love. As the years went by, Grace looked back at everything she had gone through and realized how much she had grown and strengthened. Life hadn't been easy, but each challenge, every obstacle, had brought her to this moment of complete happiness. She knew there would always be difficulties, but with Oliver, Valentina, and Lila by her side, she felt she could face anything. Sitting in the garden, with Lila playing around her and Valentina reading a book next to her, Grace looked at Oliver, who was tending to the plants. She smiled, feeling grateful for every moment life had given her, even the difficult ones, as they all led her to where she was now. Finally, Grace found the peace and happiness she had always desired, and with her family by her side, she knew that the future could only be bright. She had overcome all adversities and was now living the life she had always deserved, surrounded by the love of those who mattered most. Did you enjoy this touching story? If so, don't forget to leave your like to support the channel. If you want more impactful stories like this, subscribe now and activate the bell to not miss any updates. We want to hear from you. Share your stories, suggestions, and feedback in the comments. Together we can create an even more amazing channel. Until next time.